Welcome back, everyone, to the next question. I'm your host, Byron Tarry, and today, I guess not unlike our industry a little bit, we tend to, in this discussion around AI, often get caught far too much in the technology piece and really not enough in the human impact piece. What AI is enabling and driving in terms of the impacts around the human condition and so on. And so today, I'm going to focus almost exclusively on that human side of things today, with some discussion around really what the impact on work and workforce is. And so joining me today are two great guests, experts on this topic. And so perhaps I'll give a bit of introduction and then ask you to both introduce yourselves. So to start with, Denise Hughes. Denise, you've probably been a name that's fairly familiar now with the AV industry, and particularly as a result of your book, Your Dream Job in AV, that you published, a year or so ago now, I guess. And so perhaps you just want to give a little bit of an introduction to yourself and perhaps Jobs, your business, and how that ties to this discussion of the human in this AI transformation that we're going through.
Yeah, thanks, Byron. Yes, 26 years in the AV industry, working largely in recruitment for all of that time. So watching many trends come and go, and many workforce trends happen and change, recessions, upticks, all of the things have happened. There's been so much happen, particularly in recent years, that we've seen in the industry. And of course, now we've got the advent of AI, and we've also got other factors like integration of AV with IT happening as well. So there's never a dull moment in the industry. And yes, as you kindly mentioned, I wrote a book last year about the industry, really driven to try and promote us as an industry to new talent who might be considering their next job move.
Perfect. And then Nirit Cohen, welcome. Nirit, I should give a little bit of background, had admired from afar and reached out on LinkedIn as a result of some of your writing, and you were gracious enough for us to chat, I think probably about 6 months ago, and since then have continued to follow and keep in touch. And so you were a perfect fit as I started to look at how this topic was so important and so on. So why don't you perhaps give a little bit of history in terms of the journey way back, perhaps to a couple of decades ago, because while you may not come from the AV industry, you certainly come from a technology background and a technology company background. And so I think lots of relevance there as well. So let's hear a little bit of background to you before we get started.
So thank you so much for having me. And yeah, couple's nice. I'm aging myself. So I spent almost 30 years with Intel in, finance, human resources, and M&A roles, almost all over the world, including obviously corporate roles. And I've been intrigued with the changing world of work, or what we called the future of work, way before it became a popular topic. So I've been regularly writing about it for over a decade, and I have a column in Forbes these days, but I've had a column in some public media platform for over a decade, where I look at the trends shaping our world and try to figure out where it affects us, whether as individuals, as leaders, organizations, systems, processes, and even broader national and economic systems.
What we'll try and do today is I'm interested in capturing a lot of your big picture thinking, Nirit, and then using Denise in part, at least, to then reflect back to the narrow AV industry, and whether those are trends that we're seeing, whether those are trends we're seeing particularly internal within the industry and so on. But I think there's also a really important imperative here that these trends are the trends of our customers as well, and in the way that they're working, in the way they're looking at collaboration and teamwork and so on. And so I think there's a dual proposition here. Within NEXXT, we try and look at how do we bring relevance back to the industry and to people being able to sort of see themselves and find themselves in this. But that reflects, obviously, in this instance, both on the fears and realities of us all in our own jobs and what we're doing, but also in the roles that we play in supporting our customers and so on. And so I want to keep that sort of parallel of the internal facing and the external facing to the customer as we go. But so Nirit, why don't we start with you? I mean, we're sort of, even if we take the AI context out, we sort of had the storm that impacted the very foundations of the way we work in COVID. And then we kind of got a little bit of the eye of the storm, a little bit of a calm perhaps for a year. And then suddenly, in November of 23, ChatGPT launches and suddenly there's a whole new storm brewing. And so, we're now coming out of the other side of that, of these two huge impacts that have really started to reshape the way work and workforce looks and so on. And so perhaps you can just give a little bit of background to both of those contexts and what that started to do in shifting the very nature of work. And perhaps there's one term you use that's sort of driven over a number of those years, but this new social contract of work between the employee and the employer. And so perhaps you can sort of talk to that and what that's starting to do, I guess, in reshaping the way we need to look at work as an employee before we even start to worry about, what work itself looks like.
And I want to take a look a little bit even before COVID, in fact, almost a decade. And the reason I do that is because we sometimes tend to cancel short-term trends with words like back to. And when you look at the bigger picture and you look at something for, a longer time, you actually see the changes and they're not related to a specific instance. So a lot of what kind of showed up with COVID actually started a decade earlier. And when we think about, the iPhone with the first kind of smartphone, the apps that enabled us to access what we couldn't do before from our pockets, wireless that started becoming a lot more prevalent everywhere around the same time, the cloud that also became more abundant and enabled us. It's like all these things, right? They disconnected our tools on the desk from the cables that tied them to the wall, right? I mean, the phone, the big clunky computer, the modem, even the paper, right? The folders. And so over this decade that preceded COVID, so 2010 to 2020, we saw work got disconnected from the walls, and that result was that the work stopped being a place you went to and began to be something you did. And that happened before COVID. So that's not semantics, and it's not about work from home or office, right? It's about your value proposition that is no longer necessarily the table with the chair with the name on the door and the logo on the building, but more, what's the value I bring? Who do I collaborate with to bring that value? Who needs it? Where do they call it when they're looking for me? And how will they know I exist? And this trend of unbundling of the systems that we defined as work, which is the job and the profession and the employer and the work location, of course, we saw them unbundling over that decade. And COVID came in and it took the decision power out of the leaders. It basically forced us into this global experiment where nobody could say, I don't want to, right? And so suddenly digital space became a place, right? And a lot of people have had time, and a lot of times as individuals we don't go do what we would love to do because we risk rocking the boat. COVID rocked the boat for us, and so there was no pain and only gain in trying to say, I've always wanted to figure out how to open an eBay store, or I've always wanted to learn this thing, and now I can, and I have time, and there's really no pain in it. So as you look at this process, people realized a lot of things, and they realized life is short, and every day I go to work is a day of my life that I trade, and that better be worth it. And they realized that the reason that all the systems and processes and our entire career cycle the way it used to be doesn't have to be this way, and some of it can no longer be this way, which is what I call the changing social contract, because we see in the data, right, that people made changes. They made changes to how they work, to how they want to define connecting, work and life. We can talk a lot about these changes, but I'll pause here for a second.
Yeah, Denise, feel free to jump in, but I think that social contract was also one that you talk a lot about of decades ago. You worked for the same company for 20 or 30 years and so on, and there was this sort of trust on both sides in terms of investing in each other and so on. And obviously that time frame has started to shift drastically, and so this sort of expectation, I like to use an analogy of finance that in investing, we wouldn't put all of our stocks into one stock and then just hope that does well. We tend to sort of diversify and so on. And there's this sort of diversification shift, I guess, starting to happen as perhaps people start to look at what really was important in life, and those triggers like COVID helped bring that to say, well, should I be spreading my bets a little bit? Should I be looking at this sort of gig economy proposition? And I think sort of reinventing. We're lucky, perhaps. In the AV industry, I think a lot of us are in this industry because we're passionate and love what we do, and that's always a great starting point. But there's more to that in terms of the trust of as my employer looking out for me as much as I am for them, and some of those sort of shifting sands. And so perhaps you can elaborate a bit more on what that actually means in terms of employees, in terms of their sort of approach to their careers and what the next couple of years might look like, what the priorities are in choosing a job and so on.
Yeah, we were no exception to what you've just said, Nirit, at all. And in fact, being a technology-driven industry as well as a people-driven industry, we were no exception to that growth that you talk about within the tech and the adaptations that came from that. And then also the sheer shock of COVID, which literally stopped most of the industry in its tracks and not only changed how we were all doing business, but it also did a strange thing, obviously, because we are purveyors of video conferencing as well. And, it took that to another level. So on the one hand, boosted the world's view of video conferencing and not meeting face to face, but it took people away from their colleagues and the people that they were really, connecting with and working with. And our industry is very, very strong in terms of personal connection as well.
So Nirit, in terms of that sort of social contract shortening, I guess, with employers and the priorities employees have in choosing their paths ahead. And perhaps you can sort of start to tie that into some of the changing nature of work itself in terms of team structures and so on. You give us a little bit of background to what some of those shifts are and how that's showing up in sort of practical terms within organizations in terms of the way we're actually approaching work.
I think we should, if we look at even how careers are structured, right? Most of us set out on this journey. There was this contract, right? You went and studied a good profession. So by the end of your 20s, usually you've accumulated a body of knowledge, which gives you the right to call yourself something. Then we were told, go work for a good employer. And you had to get in the door. You looked up, you saw your boss, their boss, their boss. You had your career laid out in front of you. And one day you knew you'd be invited into a conference room with, they called it, training. Another day there'd be another conference room, you'd get a promotion, maybe a new job. And then, 15, 20 years later, you could look at yourself and say, okay, I'm either a manager or an individual contributor, professional at what I do. And you could coast to the third phase of career, which would be called retirement, where you do all the fun stuff you had to give up and somebody will pay for it. And so your kind of big arc of career, the three phases of learning, working and then maybe having fun, they coincided with our life cycle. And they shrunk significantly. Because when I actually started working, I think the half-life of knowledge, which is about how quickly half of what you know is no longer relevant. That was about 30, 35 years, across professions. So obviously some of them are faster than others, and technology is definitely faster. Half-life of knowledge these days, with a lot of research that's being done across, again, a lot of professions, is more in the 7-year range. And so it means I'm really good at a lot of things nobody needs anymore, which is, maybe sad, maybe not, but it also means you need to learn and relearn all the time. So this model where you call yourself a profession and you coast until retirement, that no longer exists. And that changes a lot of the tools we use to learn, to define who we are, the value we bring, who we collaborate with, what kind of jobs we look for, how fast they will age and we will have to leave them, or rather also how fast new ones will show up that we could potentially go do great things in. I call this change from ladder to rock climbing wall. Because, the ladder, you kind of started climbing and it was just there. It took you from point to point. Rock climbing wall, if you think about the visual, right, you have to decide every step of the way where you're putting your next foot. And sometimes it's to the right and down because you're changing slightly, and you can start in one place and end in different places on the wall. So I think that's a better analogy for what our career looks like these days.
Yeah, I love that premise, and that's, I guess, both the threat and the opportunity of these changing moments. That there really was only one way to go, and you just followed rung by rung as opposed to those shifts and so on. But I love that half-life premise that you use, and the concept that I guess AI in particular is starting to drive, where there are many that fear going to university, and by the time they get out of university, that knowledge has already reached its half-life in many instances and so on. And so, there's an imperative as we start to, I guess, shift in terms of our own thinking around continued professional development, continued readiness for what will come next. And so I think there's this sort of reinvestment proposition again that we can sort of use the analogy for of having to continue to find the time to reinvest. And look, certainly in our industry, the 40-hour-a-week job is not necessarily, particularly common. And I think there is a real challenge, a real fear in people at the moment as to where do I find the time to continue to reinvest, to continue to try and keep up, even with the shifts of understanding AI, let alone all the skill sets that wrap around that, and how we need to actually rethink, take a different mindset and approach that. So I'll ask you to talk about that, perhaps, Nirit, and then that mindset piece, I think, Denise, we've talked a little bit about as well. So I'll ask you to jump in after that. But what is, how does someone tackle this premise of knowledge now, where it's shifting so quickly that they have to take a different approach to the very foundations of what used to make them valuable?
Yeah. So you said it. It's the speed of change, and also there's opportunity and risk, right? So the opportunity is we used to choose a profession and we got stuck with it. You know what? Let's face it. It wasn't that great. You could be in your 40s and not love what you do, but you'd say, well, what? I can't start over now. It's too late for me. I've invested in this. So the opportunity is you get to every step, which is really every change that you make, every change that you can make, right? You get to adapt where you are to who you are and where you want to go. That's also the burden, because that means it's on you. It's no longer just get on the moving walkway and don't fall off and you'll land on the other side, right? You have to actually choose and do something with it. And training or learning or even redefining your profession, right? So I'm going to stay away from these words, because when we say profession, we think about a degree or, a whole set of job skills. I actually like to say, what's the value you bring? Because I like to use words that don't associate themselves with structures of the past. So when I say this, I don't necessarily mean go back to school, right? And I actually think it's on us to put aside time, budget, and attention. And learning needs to be part of working. It can no longer be a phase of life where you learn and then a phase of life where you work. You actually need, at any given time, to learn, unlearn, relearn, to work. And then also, I think, to play, because I don't know about retirement, but I don't think the financial models support this idea that you can retire at 60 anymore. And so I think you need to understand that your professional identity is a moving thing. And that doesn't mean you need to know everything all the time. It just means you need to consciously understand that you are building your own knowledge base, interests, areas of expertise, and ultimately value, and asking who needs those, what are they calling it, how will they know I exist?
Yeah, I think there's a consciousness to that, I guess, and in the past, you perhaps could have sat back and let your employer make those decisions of just investing in that training, and you just, as you sort of said, you were just on the travelator, and it would take you to some destination at 60 or 65. But there really is a mindset, I think, in an AI age, as the very premise of work is shifting. I like to sort of think of, as you create efficiencies, it's not just about doing more of the same thing, but it's actually about reinventing your time and workflows and saying that 5 hours a week that I might be recovering now actually needs to get reinvested in the learning piece. But Denise, we've been talking, as I said, about this concept of mindset. And I think that consciousness is such an important part of that mindset to start to say, if I am more in control here, I am driving the bus a little bit more, then I have to actually be very conscious about what those steps are that I'm taking. And am I really reinvesting? So what are you seeing practically in terms of whether that's an industry specific thing or even just a broader perception of that mindset that we have to have that differs now than perhaps when we first started working?
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement with what Nirit's saying about the personal responsibility. And, I've been thinking about this and exploring it, and no one's coming to save us. It is, what I'm finding when I'm talking to clients and I'm talking to people in the industry, there's not necessarily an employer down approach of, here you go, I'm going to talk to you about what we're doing with AI, and I'm going to talk to you about how this might be affecting your career. So I think that as individuals, to be able to be empowered, knowledge is power, to be able to go and take responsibility. And this starts with having a look at our mindsets. Are we open? Are we in a growth mindset about the situation, broadly speaking? Or are we taking a fixed mindset where we're almost, burying our head under the covers and don't want to go forwards towards, the new opportunity? Can we see it as a new opportunity? Or inevitably, I'm sure people will be feeling vulnerable and unsure. But this is happening, and this change is coming, and therefore I think a good place to start is examining your mindset and taking a look at where you stand with that as the foundation for then taking action and moving forward to find out information. We have candidates we talk to who have been putting themselves on AI courses and actually, arguably in this case, this may be a couple of people we've spoken to recently who are actually struggling to find a job. Now, whether that's to do with AI or not, one thing that I think, you can start to see is that if you don't stand out, if you don't do something different, if you don't, learn, change, adapt, then you may find someone else is doing that. A great quote someone said to me the other day, and they didn't know where this came from actually, but it was, AI is not going to take your job, but someone who knows how to use it really well might. And certainly in the current scenario, that's, it's an argument, isn't it, to say that if you don't take the responsibility, take a look at your mindset, put yourself in a growth mindset position, go forward towards AI and go and learn. Because actually, I know in my job and I know in many other roles, AI can help us at the moment. Yes, potentially there will be some roles that may not, are going to change or may not be there or are not there already. But AI can also help us, and to go and take that opportunity to go and learn. And so I'm not convinced that companies are going to be driving that, from what I see as if you're an employee, to take the responsibility to go and get that learning yourself, and take responsibility for your mindset. Looking at that.
Yeah, I mean that all sounds positive. We're in control, but there's a cognitive tax here that starts to happen. I fear for my job. I'm now being told I have to take more responsibility myself in terms of managing that career trajectory and so on. There's all these sort of pressures that start to build up on the employee as well, and perhaps that was a bit of laziness that we just managed to inherit from a system in the past and so on. But what's your advice to employees these days in terms of being able to manage all of these sort of inputs that are starting to come in, telling them they have to change, they have to think differently, they have to take a new responsibility in terms of what that journey means, and that can be exhausting at times. Any sort of thoughts and advice of what that starts to actually look like practically for someone, how to step back and be able to take stock and see what the path ahead should be?
I was listening to Denise, and I'm thinking for a second, I want to be less positive and nice about this. It's not whether AI will or will not, change jobs. It will change jobs, period. And no, you cannot do what you did last year, next year. There's not an option. And it's not about whether you like it or whether you would have wanted to have, the path of your parents, right? It's not up to you. And we can't stop this moving train. So the question now is, what do you do about it, right? So I'm not saying AI will take all jobs, but I am saying it will change all jobs. I mean, think about this, right? If your washing machine is making weird noises, and 5 years ago, the only way you'd go about this is call a technician, or maybe 10 years. And then 5 years ago, maybe you'd Google it, look at YouTube, see if you can figure something out. Today, you open your phone, talk to your AI with your voice, basically, take some pictures, and it'll tell you what to do. And up to a certain point, you can do this. Now, what does that mean for the technischen, right? Even when you went ahead and Googled them, what did it mean for the technician? They had to be on Google. And the ones that were on YouTube with, how-tos, right, got more traffic. They got more work. So this isn't a new thing, that technology changes how you do your job and how you stay employable. And I think what I'd like to say is that we all want to know that we're employable and that we can, continue making a good living, and you can, but it's different. If it used to be just kind of learn the new profession, go work for a good employer, now it's stay relevant, stay employable, right? Staying relevant is on you. And the jobs you can do are bigger and different, and sometimes called different things than the ones you see if you're just looking at, the 10 people around you that you're used to working with. And to see what you don't know, to see who needs what you know how to do, but might be calling it different names, I actually call this the conversation, right? There's a conversation out there somewhere. It could be in an organization you work for. It could also be in the ecosystem, right? People are talking about a challenge, an opportunity, a project, something, right? And they end up saying, who do we know that can do this, right? And then you start thinking of the people right? And they're not thinking of resumes. And they take a while before they end up on Denise's desk looking for a job, right? A hire. Sometimes it's just a project or bringing in someone, and they'll pull in the resources they know. And so they're flipping through their minds the pictures of the value that people left behind in their interactions with them. And so thinking about this and thinking about how your name will come up in these rooms, in these conversations, is a whole set of different ways to think about how you get your next, and I'm not going to say job, I'm going to say next opportunity, project, task, because you can also get portions of, right, which is different. Even within an organization, you could be working employed, but then there's this project here. It's really interesting and you'd love to be involved. How do you make sure your name comes up, right? And it could be somebody out there trying to run an industry event. And how do you make sure your name comes up? And suddenly you're making connections and you're learning new things. So learning isn't a course. It's definitely not a degree, but it's also not a course. It's interaction, it's networking, it's watching YouTubes, it's reading, it's having chats, brainstorming chats with your chat of choice. There's a lot of things you have to build in. And by the way, Byron, your podcast, right? I call those platforms, right? So you've created a platform for yourself to make sure you're talking to people you would normally be talking to about topics you would not normally be thinking about. That's a learning mechanism. And because if you schedule this and you say, I'm gonna have an episode every couple of weeks, you're forcing yourself to ask, who do I get to meet? Who do I meet in 2 weeks? And what's the topic I'm going to? So you're forcing yourself to research and read and engage, right? And you and I met online. There's no regular work circle that would have brought us together. And here we are creating, something new.
Yeah, I had never really sort of thought of it that way, but the brand, the personal brand thing, I think, which essentially helps build that sort of front of mind thing is so important. And I want to sort of use that as some of our wrap up of advice. But you touched on that changing way of work, of org structures and the way we're actually even tackling work, this sort of approach to swarming projects as opposed to having vertical silos in organizations and so on. And so I think that's really important context to just building on that premise of making myself available and visible in terms of the way we're actually tackling work is starting to shift in organizations and is far less structured, far more agile. So perhaps you could sort of touch on that. And then I want to sort of bring this home in terms of what that actually means in terms of building that brand awareness of where my real strengths are.
Once you understand that opportunities are abundant, they just don't look like the next promotion, the next job, your manager's job or something that you necessarily see. If you understand that AI will disrupt jobs, which means that pieces of jobs will go to AI and pieces of jobs will be redesigned into people jobs, right? Which means that the new format of how people and content come together to do, work and value, right? It actually means that you need to think of the mechanism of knowing what those are and being prepared for them and then making sure that you're getting called right. So I think of examples we talk about communities of practice as a way to meet people that you don't know or that they might show you opportunities that you've never seen, right? But also as, like I said, that's learning. For me, that's learning just as much as a book or a video. The fact that people swarm projects or problems by design means that they're looking for someone I know that can help me solve a problem or something I came up with. And you never know if that becomes a quick question where you bring value and you make your expertise known and you leave even if it's really short, you're leaving a footprint of who you are and why it's worth knowing you. Or it becomes a project and it becomes a job and it becomes, your full time. I think of this as, maybe it's a good way to sum this up, right? Every one of us actually ends up having almost like 4 careers in parallel, right? There's things you do that are remnants of your past careers, people calling on you for questions and, maybe help needed and maybe you like it. So you're keeping something, maybe it's a milking cow, something that's paying off, right? There's your current career, which is most of your time and your energy and your pay. you know your current career will end. It's not a matter of if, just of a when. And once you know that, it's not, I'm going to retire from here. It's whether it's 2 years, 5 years, or 7 years, doesn't matter. It means you have to start looking at the third career, which is your next one. So how do I understand what's going on, connect with people, connect with knowledge, exercise some of the muscles that my current career doesn't exercise, understand what I care about or what interests me or what I need to know more of. And then there's the fourth career, which most of us don't consider as a career, which I think is whether you volunteer or, you have a hobby. It's not a career in that it doesn't make any money, but in a world where your career depends on your skills and experience, volunteer activities and hobbies build skills and experiences and networks and knowledge, right? So I actually call this a fourth career, and sometimes it becomes your next career or it integrates with your next career. So if you think about it this way, you won't get surprised when whatever it is you're doing now is in a down cycle, whether it's not interesting to you or whether AI is eating up too much of it and it's gone, or something else happened. Because you've got your eyes on the upcycle of the next one.
So Denise, let's bring this back to practical in the industry of in most instances, I guess you're sitting there looking at people that are actively looking for a new job, whether they're in a current one and looking, or whether they're out of a job and looking. And so that combination of all those aspects that Nirit talked about in terms of building a brand, building your personal brand in the industry so that people are thinking of you, and maybe those four careers, as you talk about, Nirit, are sort of running in parallel, because volunteerism is actually a thing that we often see in our industry, and certainly has run parallel to my career in terms of being passionate about the industry and contributing in different ways and so on as well. But what are the most attractive candidates to you to put forth to the employers that you're supporting in terms of people that have built that brand? And perhaps give some practical examples of some of the candidates that have really been focused on that, and what that's done by that conscious sort of brand building over time, not necessarily in the perspective of the next job that they'll get, but just because that's part of what they're doing, and building that wider brand premise for whatever the future might hold.
Yeah, sure. I think that we've talked about it, but you need to be relevant, finding ways to stand out, be more than just your digital footprint, because and get out of the digital, not be able to do more than just be on the digital, be able to rise above the digital noise, because increasingly people are using AI to put their CVs together. And at the moment, we're not at a stage yet where AI can spot the CVs, or not in volume, but at some point I believe the AI is going to get to a stage where actually it can spot that your CV's written in AI and may reject that back. So I think there's using the AI to be able to help us with putting things like CVs together, but keeping authenticity of yourself, both online, looking at all of your profiles online, consistency, are they authentic to you? Not always using AI completely, or filters, or things that remove you from you, and still enabling that human interaction and that human piece. Obviously there's a lot of networking that goes on in our industry, and the in-person connection is still really valid and still really important. So yes, I think authenticity, trying to find ways to be different, making sure you're relevant, making sure that you're learning. These would be all the things that I would suggest. It's interesting. We've even had conversations recently with people to send covering letters. I think are one of the probably the most retro application processes. But yet a covering letter now can stand you out from somebody else. People having difficulties standing out when applying online and receiving, applying for mass jobs, receiving mass rejections. So yeah, in a nutshell, without going down a rabbit hole of suggestions, then I would say it's finding the ways to stand out and investing in yourself, the online is an extension of your resume, and looking at that personal connection piece too.
I could talk for hours on this, but we need to wrap here. But Nirit, I'm going to leave perhaps the last concept to you, and that is that the hiring process and that resume premise has sort of started to struggle in the last little bit in terms of, that was a very retroactive look at what you've done as opposed to necessarily the forward look. And I know you've talked about in some of your writing some of the premise of that employers hiring are even struggling to kind of adapt in this, how do I select the right candidates? And I like the idea of the cover letter, Denise, that you're talking about, because that was a way to be authentic and talk a little bit about what I'm passionate about, what my forward view is, as opposed to necessarily just looking at that historical resume piece. But perhaps you can sort of wrap with any advice in terms of what that actually starts to look like in being able to stand out, in being able to show that authenticity of your future focus, as opposed to necessarily the jobs that I've done, which in many instances, anything past a few years retroactive is really perhaps not particularly relevant anymore, when that knowledge base that you gained has lost some of its relevancy. What is the imperative now, I guess, if you are trying to create that brand and trying to sort of show the true future you?
It's a really good question. I think that if we understand that what you will be doing in a couple of years is different from what you're getting hired to do today, and definitely different from what you did before. Employers' challenge, right, is to try to understand or assess your potential, and telling them you're great at, people or projects or innovation. I mean, everybody has all the buzzwords, right? And we don't know how to assess buzzwords like that. And so you start getting all resumes looking the same, everybody putting in the keywords, basically my bot's going to apply on my behalf, your bot's going to read my application on your behalf. That doesn't make you unique. That just makes you like everybody else. So I think that the idea is, what is it that you're bringing that employees value, and understanding, and that they look at and say, okay, this person not only knows what I need them to do today, but they'll also figure out what I'm going to need them to do tomorrow, right? So if we kind of started with AI, maybe we end with AI, we don't understand what the world will be like in a couple of years. I think we're underestimating the degrees of changes. Try to imagine the world before the iPhone, right? Compared to kind of, you didn't have, every app you used wasn't there, right? So we don't understand. But we do understand that people will need to use this as a tool. They're not going to be able to say, oh, I don't want to navigate using, Google Maps or, other map apps. I'm going to use a map. That's not, doesn't make sense for most of the situations, right? So you need to show that you're capable of leading the way with the things that you need to know these days. So if I'm a young starting out person in the industry today, and it's hard to get jobs for young people because, like you said, they went to school, learned stuff, and either it was during COVID or it was pre-AI, pre-Gen AI. A lot of it's not that applicable, and also organizations think they can replace entry-level roles with AI tools, which is a whole different conversation. But I think what I would say is, show that you know how to learn, that you understand the ecosystem, that you're on top of the latest and greatest, because that's what's going to make you stand out. Will keep employers comfortable, that you'll stay that way, and that you'll also bring your team along. So it's not just, I'm hiring you and you will add value, but I'm hiring you and you will help the people around you that don't know how this thing works, and you'll bring value to them as well. So that's a great leading edge I would go with.
Yeah, the democratization of knowledge applies to everything we're doing, and how to stand out, how to show your future agility, I guess, is the critical piece, as opposed to where you've been. Look, I've loved this discussion, and maybe we'll have to do this again sometime and tackle a whole bunch of other topics we didn't even get to. But Nirit, as we wrap, where can people find you, some of your writings and so on, and continue to challenge themselves and have that consciousness and mindset of continuing to prepare for the future? What's the best place to find you?
So I think if you like to join one of my newsletters, there's one on LinkedIn and there's another one on Substack. They're called The Future of Less Work. It's also the name of my podcast. And then, of course, I share on these newsletters my Forbes columns, and then other content that I think is interesting for my readers.
Perfect. And Denise, what's the path to you and indeed to Whoop Jobs and so on?
So you can find me and the company on LinkedIn. Also our website, whoopjobs.co.uk, and also I'm on Instagram as well. So and Facebook. Actually, all the platforms probably. No, most of them. So yes, please do follow and connect. I'm very happy to have conversations about this topic, with anyone who wants to engage.
Well, great. Thank you both. I guess one other interesting piece to this is, Nirit, you're based in Israel, Denise in the UK, so we often get caught in the North American perspective on AI and so on. So just interesting to get those more global perspectives and so on as well. So appreciate both your time. With that, we'll wrap, but I hope that was helpful for everyone in terms of some of those practical paths that we can start to think of what really is shifting. And while AI is certainly a trigger and an enabler to some of these things, these things really do come and down to the very practical human things. And I'll perhaps wrap with a stat that I saw the other day. You talked even about the premise of young people struggling to get jobs, but I saw a stat that showed that yes, young people going into very automated, process-oriented jobs are there's a real struggle for people to find those paths. But in fact, young people that have AI skill set going into more thought-oriented, creative-oriented jobs are in fact the rate is more than double in terms of their capacity to gain jobs and so on. So, there really are foundations, particularly to the younger generations that are digital native, that are at the front lines of organizations, that I think have real opportunity to differentiate themselves if they can apply that broader digital native knowledge into that sort of creative workflow as well. And I think that's the opportunity for us all, whether we're a slightly older generation, as we may consider ourselves, or the younger generation. That power of that digital plus human creativity opportunity is so powerful. So with that, thank you both, and we'll wrap this episode. This has been The Next Question, and we'll see you next episode.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.